Hello, everyone. Welcome to another lesson in connection to the contemporary world. Today, we will learn about the globalization of world economics. So, what do we expect to learn here? First, we will learn how to define economic globalization, and we will identify the actors that facilitate economic globalization. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, regards economic globalization as a historical process representing the result of human innovation and technological progress. It is characterized by the increasing integration of economies around the world through the movement of goods, services, and capital across borders. These changes are the products of people, organizations, institutions, and technologies. As with all other processes of globalization, there is a qualitative and subjective element to this definition. How does one define increasing integration? When is considered trade has increased? Is there a particular threshold? Even while the IMF and ordinary people grapple with the difficulty of arriving at precise definitions of globalization, they usually agree that a drastic economic change is occurring throughout the world. According to IMF, the value of trade, the goods and services, as a percentage of world gross domestic product or GDP increased from 42.1% in 1980 to 62.1% in 2007. Increased trade also means that investments are moving all over the world at faster speeds. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, the amount of foreign direct investments flowing across the world was 57 billion US dollars in 1982. By 2015, that number was 1.76 trillion dollars. These figures represent a dramatic increase in global trade in the span of just a few decades. It has happened not even after one human lifespan. Apart from the sheer magnitude of commerce, we should also note the increased speed and frequency of trading. These days, supercomputers can execute millions of stock purchases and sales between different cities in a matter of seconds through a process called high frequency trading. Even the items being sold and traded are changing drastically. 10 years ago, buying books or music indicates acquiring physical items. Today, however, a book can be digitally downloaded to be read with an e-reader, and a music album refers to the 15 songs on MP3 format you can purchase and download from iTunes. Here, we are going to trace how economic globalization came about. It will also assess this globalization system and examine who benefits from it and who is left out. International trading system is not a new concept. The oldest known international trade route was the Silk Road. It is a network of pathways in the ancient world that spanned from China to what is now the Middle East and to Europe. It was called as such because one of the most profitable products traded through this network was silk, which was highly prized, especially in the area that is now the Middle East, as well as in the West, today's Europe. Traders used the Silk Road regularly from 130 BCE, when the Chinese Han Dynasty opened trade to the West, until 1453 BCE, when the Ottoman Empire closed it. However, while the Silk Road was international, it was not truly global because it had no ocean routes that could reach the American continent. So, when did full economic globalization begin? According to historians Denis O. Flynn and Arturo Heraldes, the age of globalization began when all important populated continents began to exchange products continuously, both with each other directly and indirectly via other continents. and in value sufficient to generate crucial impacts on all trading partners. Flane and Heraldez traced this back to 1571 with the establishment of the galleon trade that connected Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in Mexico. This was the first time that the Americas were directly connected to Asian trading routes. For Filipinos, it is crucial to note that economic globalization began on the country's shores. The galleon trade was part of the age of mercantilism. From the 16th century to the 18th century, countries, primarily in Europe, competed with one another to sell more goods as a means to boost their country's income, and this now later on called monetary reserves. To defend their products from competitors who sold goods more cheaply, these regimes, mainly the monarchies, imposed high tariffs, forbade colonies to trade with other nations, restricted trade routes, and subsidized its exports. Mercantilism was thus also a system of global trade with multiple restrictions. A more open trade system emerged in 1867 when, following the lead of the United Kingdom, the US and other European nations adopted the gold standard at an international monetary conference in Paris. Broadly, its goal was to create a common system that would allow for more efficient trade and prevent the isolationism of the mercantilist era. The countries thus established a common basis for currency prices and a fixed exchange rate system, which is all based on the value of gold. Despite facilitating simpler trade, the gold standard was still a very restrictive system as it compelled countries to go back to their currencies and with fixed gold reserves. During World War I, when countries depleted their gold reserves to fund their armies, many were forced to abandon the gold standard. Since European countries had low gold reserves, they adopted floating currencies that were no longer redeemable in gold. Returning to a pure standard became more difficult as the global economic crisis called the Great Depression started during the 1920s and extended up to the 1930s, further emptying government coffers. This depression was the worst and longest recession ever experienced by the Western world. Some economists argued that it was largely caused by the gold standard since it limited the amount of circulating money and therefore reduced demand and consumption. If governments could only spend money that was equivalent to gold, its capacity to print money and increase the money supply was severely curtailed. Again, the gold standard, though once common, has proven to be a very restrictive form of globalizing trade. Economic historian Barry Eichengreen argues that the recovery of the United States really began when, having abandoned the gold standard, the US government was able to free up money to spend on reviving the economy. At the height of World War II, other major industrialized countries followed suit. Though more indirect versions of the gold standard were used until as late as the 1970s, the world never returned to the gold standard of the early 20th century. Today, the world economy operates based on what are called fiat currencies, currencies that are not backed by precious metals and whose value is determined by their cost relative to other currencies. This system allows governments to freely and actively manage their economies by increasing or decreasing the amount of money in circulation as they see fit.